Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Forward Maryland. Thank you for being patient with us during a quite long 3-week Dr. hiatus from Long and Foster, from the Ritz-Carlton Total Landscaping in Philadelphia. I'm Bill Woodcock.
And I'm Jason Booms, still in Columbia, Maryland.
And Jason, part of the long hiatus has been so that we can enjoy the first 9 days of the Biden administration. So far, what is your most enduring Biden administration memory?
Oh gosh, where to start? Which executive orders that he signed do I love the most? Too many to count. It's just a shame that it's being overshadowed by just so much other foolishness going on in the country. And I just want to state with this opportunity for the record that as the former president of the East Lansing Hillel Cooperative, I had absolutely no knowledge of a Jewish space laser. Thank you.
Well, I shouldn't. The Lutheran space laser community thanks you for your admission of a lack of knowledge, but I'm going to go solidly in the camp of Major and Champ. So as being so far the most enduring memory of the administration, although certainly lots of cool things, and I'll also bring a close second place to not waking up, turning on national news and hearing the president tweeted overnight and then midnight ellipses.
Well, unfortunately, I still wake up with that trepidation every day as to who knows what's going to happen. So, I'm not quite feeling that sense of peace yet. Hopefully soon.
Joe starts tweeting overnight. I mean, it's going to be folks and malarkey and my golly.
Oh yeah, it'll be casual.
Yeah. So tonight we kick off coverage of the 2022 Maryland General Assembly session. We waited a couple weeks for the delegates and senators to get their sea legs and figure out here's a term you don't hear that often, new normal for the Maryland General Assembly. And as the General Assembly has started its session anew, we are proud this evening to bring to you a freshman delegate from Montgomery County, from District 19, the heart of Montgomery County. Think Georgia Avenue going east, outside of the northeast corner, just a little bit south there, your Durwood, your Norbeck area. His name is Delegate Vaughn Stewart. Delegate Stewart, thank you for joining us this evening.
Absolutely, Bill. Happy to be here.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, because our listeners and viewers are statewide, and tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us how you came to be a member of the House of Delegates.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, it is a pleasure to be here to chat with you guys. I have been catching up on a few of your older episodes to cram in preparation for this. It seems like Howard County is kind of the epicenter for Maryland politics. Like, I think per capita, Howard County has probably 10 times more podcasts for what it's worth than Montgomery County. So I don't know what's in the water up there, but you are doing great, and it's in service, I think, to all of us podcast heads out there. So my name is Vaughn Stewart. This is my third session of the General Assembly. So I was elected in 2019. I live in the aforementioned Durwood, and as you mentioned, my district stretches from kind of the broader Rockville area to the broader Silver Spring area in Montgomery County. Most notably, perhaps, it includes Leisure World, which is the largest retirement community in the Northeast. But I am originally from nowhere near Montgomery County. I am originally from the sometimes, or I guess I should say rarely, great state of Alabama. So I grew up in Alabama. I was born and raised there. I'm actually a fifth generation Alabamian. My family originally came there, I think, from basically the mines of Eastern Kentucky, and they descended down to Alabama. So I'm from a kind of good, working class Appalachia family and background. And I basically fled the state at the first chance I got, to be honest. And I went to college in the Northeast. I went to college in Philly, and I went to law school in New York. And then my wife and I settled in the Montgomery County and kind of the DC area after law school. And in terms of, what brought me to this place and being the General Assembly, I was working at a pretty cushy law firm job in downtown DC. I was making pretty good money, but of course, I also had $200,000 of student debt that I was trying to pay off as quickly as possible. And I had a swollen lymph node in my neck, and it was persistent, and they kept testing it, and I kept having to go to the doctor about it. They kept telling me I was probably okay, but eventually I finally got a biopsy result back that it was malignant, and then I had non-Hodgkin lymphoma. And I had to go through 4 rounds of pretty tough chemo at Johns Hopkins. I lost all my hair. I had to basically stay inside for 4 months because my immune system was so low. They told me that I probably shouldn't even go get the mail. And that experience, it was actually the second time I've had cancer. And at that time I'm 32 now. So I had not even reached 30 yet. This was in 2017. And it was the second time I had cancer. And so that was really a big kind of proverbial kick in the rear end for me on 2 different, and I think has kind of motivated me and kind of guided me in 2 ways. So the first is, especially when you're that young, but really no matter what age you are, when you kind of face death like that and you face your own mortality, it's just a wake-up call that nobody's guaranteed tomorrow. And it makes you really look at what your decisions are, what you've been doing with your life, and what you're planning for your future. And I was sitting there basically helping corporations maximize their profit as a bank regulatory associate at a major international law firm. And I looked around and I was bald headed and was like, am I really, living and consistent with my values? If I drop dead next year, what do I have to show for it? And certainly it felt like that. I mean, this kind of lymphoma thing can come back all the time. I was fortunate that I was early stage and that I was young and I could fight it off. But I thought, hey, I mean, if I've only got 5 years, 10 years left, I've had cancer twice already, maybe third time is going to be the not the charm. I want to make my time left on the planet count. And there just so happened to be a seat that opened up, a vacancy in the House of Delegates in my district. And so I thought, hey, this seems crazy. I'll go for this. I knocked on doors every day and every weekend, all day, every weekend, and every single evening, every single weekday for about 11 months. And I started the campaign right after my chemo ended. I was bald when I did my announcement video. And when I started meeting people, there's still a lot of people in my district who, when they see me with hair, don't recognize me. And it paid off. I fundraised well. I worked really, really hard, and I pulled it off. And now that I've been in the General Assembly, I'm on the House Environment and Transportation Committee. And the other kind of thing coming from that story and the cancer experience for me that's important is I really think the conflict between human health and the planet on the one hand and corporate profits on the other hand is kind of like that distinction and that battle is the defining one for me in my life. I feel that really acutely. And so as a member of the House of Delegates, I really try to stick up for the underdog, the working person, the regular person, who may be exposed to toxic chemicals or maybe just, be exploited in other ways by the economy, wage stagnation, maybe they're an immigrant or whatever, and try to basically stick up for people that don't have the high price lobbyists in Annapolis. Because I think that if more people had stuck up for me and my neighbors and the workers at the Monsanto, so I should go back, actually. I missed a crucial part of the story. In all likelihood, the reason that I've had cancer twice at such a young age is that Monsanto used my hometown in Alabama as a dumping ground for PCBs.
Wow.
And so that's a relevant part of the story, obviously a crucial part of the story. So my hometown has some of the highest PCB contamination rates ever recorded in human history. And the cancer that's most associated with PCB exposure is non-Hodgkin lymphoma, which is what I had in 2017. So while I can't sort of prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Monsanto gave me cancer, it certainly seems that way. And so that's why this distinction between sort of keeping folks safe and healthy on the one hand versus corporations maximizing their profit on the other is something that I think a few other legislators had been fighting for regular people and workers at the plant and my neighbors and my family and me back then, then maybe I wouldn't have had to go through all these, malignant ordeals.
So thank you for sharing, first off, all of that. Looking at your background and your biography, while preparing for this podcast, I was amazingly impressed by every bit of your background and your tale so far at this stage in life is one of great persistence and of overcoming. And I'm very happy to have you share that with us tonight. Also, the other thing that finds me impressed at this moment is everything you said about your legislative priorities. Are not just talking to talk, as I have up your list of things you're sponsoring for FY or for FY. I'm still at work for the 2021 session. You take as a freshman delegate, there is no reducing the permit fee from $5 to $3 on this docket. These are big swings at big issues, including issues of population health, the environment, vehicle, speeding laws. Lots of things where there's personal responsibility, but also more importantly, corporate responsibility, landlord-tenant rights. I mean, things that will have long-term impactful things in the for people's lives, long-term impacts. So can you talk briefly? I'm gonna defer to Jason, who I'm sure will grill you on minutia. But can you speak briefly about 2 or 3 of the pieces of legislation you're sponsoring this year, or have sponsored, or have had passed so far in your term, of which you're especially proud?
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Bill, very much for the kind words. It has been quite a winding, path to get here, but I'm happy to be here. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think that some of the smaller bills, the more incremental bills, are important. We certainly pass a lot of those in the General Assembly, so I don't mean to disparage, colleagues who have those kind of, smaller step bills, but I do like to take big swings, and I like to shoot for the home runs with my bills. And I try to legislate a little bit like I was saying, that I think we should all start to live our lives, which is that, pretend like I'm not going to get any more sessions. I try to kind of go out thinking, what if this is my last session? Not necessarily in a morbid way, but, we could all lose re-election. Something could come up in our life to make us have to resign or whatever. And I want to be able to say at the end of the day, looking back at my legislative career, that I left it all out on the field. And I also think that passing bills is not necessarily should always be the end all be all for legislators, because I think you can move conversations forward on a statewide level or even a national level if you do it right, by shifting the Overton window and pushing big ideas out there to move the conversation. And I also think that even, a bill that you put in one year, it may seem utopian and crazy when you first put it in, but if you give it 5 years, especially given, I think, the sort of leftward trajectory and trend of the General Assembly, give it a few years and all of a sudden that idea will seem mainstream. And I'll give you, as a sort of a pivot or a transition actually into your question about my bills this session, I'll give you a perfect example, which is that I'm introducing a bill to ban ICE detention centers. And I know this is a hot topic in Howard County as related to the detention center in Jessup. When I first, heard about this bill and put this bill on the table in early 2019, so after our 2019 session, some advocates sort of brought this idea to me. And as I was talking to other people, my colleagues, this was viewed as kind of a crazy idea. The idea that you would ban ICE detention centers from the state and say no more could come in, and the ones that exist would have to be phased out. It was seen as pretty radical. And I think that's why the advocates approached me, because they felt like there were only a few legislators who would be crazy enough to put something like this in. And that was probably right. And when I introduced it in the 2020 session, I think even by that point, 9 months later, it was seen as a more mainstream idea, but we didn't quite get it over the finish line because of the shortened session. But now as we approach the 2021 session, Senator Will Smith, who is, progressive and bright, but who's about as mainstream as they come, being the chairman of the JPR committee in the Senate, he's now the Senate sponsor of the bill, and it's now being teed up by all accounts for passage, as kind of like a no-brainer thing that you would do. And it kind of just shows that the very, very short trajectory that bills can have to go from, impossible to inevitable in just a few years. Now, this bill is unique. I mean, ICE has done a lot of work for us by being a depraved agency, bordering kind of a terrorist group, right? I mean, it's rare that your villain behaves so villainously in such a short period of time as to even, forcibly sterilize people to make your bill look better and better and better. So it is a little bit of an outlier in that regard, but it does, I think, sort of, show how quickly the ball can move. And I think it reinforces my legislative strategy, which is to sort of swing hard and go for the fences. But a couple of other things that I've worked on. So housing is a big issue for me. I always put in a lot of housing bills. I have about 5 or 6 housing bills this year, and I'm working in conjunction, kind of leading the effort in the House, along with another one of my colleagues, Delegate Janelle Wilkins of the Silver Spring area. We're working and sort of spearheading a housing justice package, which is sort of a COVID specific set of bills to try to keep people in their homes during this pandemic and thereafter. And so she has a sort of an eviction renter focus component of that bill. And I have the homeowner foreclosure analog that I'm doing with Senator Jill Carter of Baltimore City. And I know Howard County knows her well, given the congressional district she ran in overlaps with so much with Howard County. But that bill would basically do a number of things, including extending the foreclosure moratorium. It would make it easier to get forbearance relief, which is very crucial. Something like 20% of homeowners are struggling to pay their mortgage, but only 5% are in forbearance plans. And then also it would ease the passage of repayment after forbearance by doing a number of things to make sure that, for example, servicers aren't requiring lump sum payments once you're coming out of forbearance. So I have a number of housing things. I mean, I have some renter bills. I have a bill that I'd like to put in every year that's slowly gaining progress about social housing, which is sort of based on the Vienna model of public housing, where you spend a lot of money on mixed income public housing that's well kept up and located near jobs and transit. So housing has always been a big issue of mine. And then I'm also working with a group on a package called the Fair Funding Coalition on a package of bills to basically tax the rich and the largest corporations to help pay for our recovery. I'm a big believer that if we're going to have to balance our budget and provide COVID relief and fully fund education, it's going to take money. And I don't think that we should be balanced. I don't think we should be doing that on the backs of working people who are the ones that have been disproportionately hit by the pandemic. I think that we should be taxing people who have disproportionately been profiting from the pandemic. So I have a bill that actually passed the House last year. It didn't get through across the finish line with the Senate, called the throwback rule, that would basically close a corporate tax loophole and generate about $50 million in revenue every year that we could use to, for example, hopefully, send Maryland statewide stimulus checks to people or the like. And then finally, I would just close in terms of legislative priorities by saying, I have a number of things on the environment and banning certain bad things. I'm actually working with a brilliant group of 8th graders at Burley Manor Middle School in Howard County on a bill to ban cancerous driveway sealants. This is like an amazing rock star team that's gotten it banned in Howard and a number of other counties. And now we're going statewide. And it kind of looks like that bill is actually going to pass. Fingers crossed. We'll see. I think we're looking good in the House. I don't know about the Senate. But so I have a number of environmental bills as well. And I also have a big ethics portfolio. So I always put in a few ethics bills every year. I have a bill that challenges Governor Hogan on his real estate dealings, which I think are basically crooked. And last year I passed an ethics bill to slow the revolving door between agency heads and private lobbyist companies. So yeah, that's a lot. But my committee, I'm fortunate. My committee has broad jurisdiction. We have housing, environment, transportation, and ethics on one committee. And so I try to kind of play in all 4 camps.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Thank you for that. Jason, over to you.
Thank you, Bill. Delegate Stewart, simple question. What can we do to pull the country, Maryland, and even locally back from the precipice?
Great question. I think organize, right? I think organize. I think that we all as individuals, the number one thing we can do is to talk with our neighbors and build community organizations and just kind of build community and exercise collective power. I'm a big believer that, if we want to change the direction of things on the country, for example, with the new president and the new Senate and the new House, we need to stop obsessing over the individual personalities of those people and say, Joe Biden is this or Joe Biden is that. He was this then, he is this now. Joe Biden is going to be what we want him to be. That's the beauty of President Biden, is he's not Donald Trump. He's actually susceptible to pressure from regular people if we organize and exercise power as a collective. And so I think President Biden on a number of things can be moved. I think someone like Senator Manchin, if folks in West Virginia organize, if we help them to do so, can be moved. And so in terms of pulling a country back from the precipice, if we want to try to tamp down on all the hate, the bigotry, the rise of fascism, neo-Nazism, anti-Semitism, I think it really starts with the Democrats doing a good job. Now, obviously, I think we should expel all fascists from the House, including the House of Delegates. And we should absolutely hold everyone accountable who incited the terrorists on January 6th. So, I mean, I have a hard line on that, like get rid of all of them. We are not going to start healing the country until people are held accountable. But I also think that Democrats should be held to account here. I think that if we deliver a real robust recovery and change for people quickly, boldly, tangibly, that's the best way to unite the country and heal folks, is by helping people with their material needs. And we can make our leaders do that. We have the power to do that. You know, LBJ wouldn't have been nearly as consequential of a president, nor would have FDR, if there weren't the coalitions and the unions and different progressive activist groups to push them in the right direction. The reason I think that Barack Obama was a disappointment for a lot of folks on the left is that we weren't mobilized as the left. We were kind of just happy that President Obama was there, and we weren't mobilized in the same way that we are now. So I'm optimistic. I think we've turned a corner with the new administration. I think there's a lot to do, but I think as long as folks don't just go to brunch and say, oh, we got President Biden, so we're good now, and remain active and remain engaged and keep pushing on the national level, and that goes for Annapolis too. I mean, I want people to harass me as well. You know, politicians, elected officials, we shouldn't be like celebrities or like cause for people to like, you know, applaud us or worship us or fawn over us. We work for the people. And so I'm looking forward to people putting the pressure on me to make sure that I'm maximizing my public position in the people's interest.
Interesting. Well, and speaking of organizing, and because you mentioned organizing and progressive activists, I read with great delight in John Judas's book, The Socialist Awakening, that you have DSA ties, and some of those good folks helped you out with your campaign. Could you just, so many people have very similar belief systems to the Democratic Socialists of America. Disclosure, I'm a member. And but they don't seem to be able to make that leap. Now, granted, the DSA now has 90,000 members, and numbers have climbed exponentially over the past several years. What is it that really, I mean, from your issue profile, I can kind of tell, but what made you sort of pass over to say, you know, this is who I am, and this is what an organization I want to join?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first, let me applaud my constituent, John Judas. One of the perks of him being my constituent is sometimes he drops my name in his book, or he one time dropped his name in his book, which I appreciate. Everyone should go buy all of John Judas's books. But yeah, so I am a member of DSA, and they did help. And I was an endorsed candidate on both the local and the national level for DSA. For me, what democratic socialism fundamentally means is I think people focus a lot on the socialism half of that and less on the democratic or democracy part of it. To me, it's simple. It's about expanding democracy where it exists. For example, by making voting easier, by making sure that, you know, we get rid of money in politics, that we have campaign finance reform, that we hold people to high, you know, lobbying and ethics standards, sort of, in other words, purifying our voter democracy, but also expanding democracy to places where now it scarcely exists. And by that, I mean the workplace. I think, you know, basically most workers in this country go to work and they're completely bossed around by their employers, and they have absolutely no democratic say whatsoever in what happens to them while they're on the clock. And so fundamentally, I think what democratic socialism means is worker democracy. It's empowerment of the workplace. And so I firmly believe in that. I think that a lot of my colleagues would agree with my policy positions on a number of these things. I mean, things like worker membership on corporate boards, you know, co-determinism like they have in Germany, or things like, you know, making unionization easier. I think a lot of my colleagues would agree with me that, you know, government should be more involved in certain large scale industries. Like, for example, public broadband is great. It works amazingly not too far from my hometown. Chattanooga, Tennessee has some of the fastest internet in the world using their public broadband system. I'm a big believer in public banking. I think, having a public option in the banking system would yield great dividends for the state of Maryland. I know that my colleague Delegate Stephanie Smith has a bill that would study that issue. So I think when you talk to people, I think you're exactly right, Jason, that a lot of the sort of precepts, both on a theoretical level and on a practical level, are held by a lot of people that are members of the Democratic Party. They just can't get past that word socialism because they've been indoctrinated by years of schooling that socialism is some sort of evil thing that's related vaguely to Joseph Stalin or Vladimir Lenin. And really, what I identify it with is the sewer socialists of Milwaukee. So I don't know, I'm sure you're familiar, Jason. I don't know the extent you are, Bill, but socialists basically ran the city of Milwaukee for the better part of the 20th century. And they weren't like quoting Marx, they weren't like reading theory. What it was about is providing good government. I mean, sewer socialism was a derogatory term used about them at first that they then sort of took on themselves and weaponized. That meant they cared about sewers, right? They cared about the instruments of the public. They cared about the commons. And so I really try to take that to heart as well. They cleaned up the corruption in Milwaukee so people could trust the government. And then they used the government to do lots of amazing things like build senior centers and beautiful libraries and parks that are still in Milwaukee. In fact, one of my political heroes and mentors who I worked for is Jamie Raskin. His great uncle, Max Raskin, was a sewer socialist elected official in Milwaukee, so yeah. And he's mentioned a lot of like the write-ups about sewer socialism, Max Raskin. But yeah, I mean, so for me, it's about trying to make government work better and for the people and not be corrupted by private interests. I mean, that's what fundamentally sewer socialism is about. And I'm proud to identify as a democratic socialist and principally a sewer socialist.
Fantastic. One last question before I kick it back to Bill. Just curious as to your thoughts on, what do you think in 2021 are the best ways to encourage union membership? Because one of the things we saw it in the United States, we saw this in the UK, diminished union membership leading to diminished consciousness of, the middle and working classes. And as a result, the ability of the establishment, let's say, classes to run roughshod over the interest of the common folk. Do you see any different ways of organizing now that can really build up union membership to serve as a bulwark against those who are less inclined towards supporting the common interest?
Well, there are a number of different policy prescriptions that you can do to bolster union. I mean, because all we have to do is look outside of this country, right? I mean, the precipitous decline of unionization that we've seen in the United States since the 60s or 70s just has not been felt to the same extent in much of Europe and even in Canada. And so in terms, I think sectoral bargaining is, for example, a really interesting policy prescription that other places are sort of experimenting with to increase unionization. I think the PRO Act on the federal level has a number of different policy changes that I really hope President Biden will push for and the Democratic Senate will shove through. So from a policy standpoint, I think there's plenty of different aspects to do. I also think that we as individuals have a role to play. I think that if folks are interested in trying to move unionization forward and believe that unions are an absolutely instrumental or absolutely vital piece of the puzzle, we want to move America to in a more humane direction, which is something I certainly believe, then go join a profession that is not unionized, and try to organize your workforce into a union. I actually, in my sort of day job, work for an organization called Jobs to Move America. And I do worker organizing and community organizing. And, the best way to make an impact as an individual, rather than just advocate for laws, is to, try to organize your workplace. Or if you're a young college student, try to go into a profession where you can potentially organize your workplace if you've got options. And if you're fortunate enough to already be a union member, try to be a more vocal and active voice within your union to make it more focused on militancy and also more focused on kind of the broader societal impact of unions rather than just narrow day-to-day issues regarding your own workplace. So there's a lot to do. I mean, we could talk probably all night about different policy prescriptions you can do. There are interesting things even about unemployment insurance, for example. Like I was reading the other day about how Scandinavia actually dispenses unemployment insurance through their union system. And then unions provide priority for that unemployment insurance to their own members thereby inducing membership, union membership that way, and also kind of making the unemployment compensation system much more seamlessly run and more efficiently run, which of course has been a huge problem in Maryland. We've been one of the slowest states to write unemployment checks. Now we're one of the slowest states to do the vaccine rollout. So it's actually a really interesting time to be discussing sort of sewer socialism from the lens of like government competence, because, as Democrats or progressives or whatever you want to call it, we rely on people's trust in government to pull things off. And sometimes that doesn't necessarily mean just hiring more employees. Sometimes that actually means delegating things to, for example, labor unions or community groups, if we think that's more democratic and could be more efficient.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Delegate. Sorry, back over to you, Bill.
Well, thank you, Jason. So we have about 10, 15 minutes left, Delegate. So a couple things, and one more question along Jason's line before I hopefully turn to a little bit lighter topic, because I heard you before speak about extremism and right-wing extremism in the state. And in the 95 corridor, I run across a distressingly high number of people who think that that sort of behavior is limited to rural areas, West Virginia, Western, the part of Pennsylvania lovingly known as Pennsyltucky,
Right.
the part of the state of Maryland that I like to call Marylina. But I do believe my feeling, and I think Jason would agree with me, that we have seen some of this ugliness within our own borders. So perhaps certainly not asking you to call out any colleagues, but if you could just kind of share a little bit of experience of your own encounters with that mindset.
Well, you're certainly right about that. I mean, 100%. I mean, I'm a self-described or self-proclaimed redneck, personally. I mean, I'm a big Alabama football fan. I eat terribly. Like, I'm an Alabama boy at heart, even though my accent has faded away a little bit. So I'm always, the guy in the Democratic circle saying, hey, liberals should not be hating on the South and hating on rural areas all the time for a number of reasons. Number one, if we really think that we're the party of the people, then that should not start by sort of just raining epithets down on anyone who, lives in rural America or lives in rural Maryland. Number two, if we care about building a broad political coalition, it definitely doesn't start by trying to label a bunch of people racist. That's not like the first step to a winning coalition. And number three, I think that you're absolutely right that hate, bigotry, anti-Semitism, white supremacy and white supremacist groups and organizations are absolutely not limited to certain parts of the country or certain parts of this state. In fact, Montgomery County has the distinction of having the highest number of hate bias incidences in the state. And I think that holds per capita too in the last several years. So no, it's absolutely a statewide concern. I actually have a bill I'm working on with Senator Heddleman, formerly Delegate Heddleman of Baltimore County, about this issue. And it kind of speaks to exactly what we're talking about. It's about basically a restorative or kind of a rehabilitative approach to hate crimes and hate offenses and bias incidences. I'm a big believer that we're not going to solve this problem by just incarcerating our way out of it. We're not just going to be able to imprison all the racists, convict all the bigots, and then that'll be the end of it. I certainly do think that people should be held accountable. For example, if you storm the Capitol or you incite that. But I also think that for a lot of folks who are just picking up the spray can for the first time to spray paint a swastika on a school, there's a lot of time there and a lot of temporal sort of potential for us to reach that person before they're radicalized to the extent of harming someone or storming the Capitol. And so what the bill would do is provide a pathway for judges to sentence hate crime convictees, particularly younger folks or those with like sort of more minor offenses, to a curriculum that the University of Maryland would create, an anti-bias training. And this has been proven in a number of parts in the country and the world to be an extremely effective way of reducing recidivism. So I feel strongly that, that first of all, absolutely our areas are not immune. In some cases, the urban areas or the more suburban areas in Maryland are actually the worst. This is not at all a regional issue. whatsoever, or a state by state or whatever issue. Hate lives everywhere, and it's on the rise. Sadly, I mean, a lot of it is President Trump, but in some ways, President Trump is a symptom of growing hate and disillusionment. I mean, I fundamentally, this is a little bit of an aside, and then I'll shut up and listen to the next question, but I think we really kind of have a crisis of belonging in this country. You know, I mean, it may sound like a little hippy dippy, but I think fundamentally we view ourselves as sort of atomized individuals, you know, and I think this has happened over the course of several decades, but we no longer view ourselves as sort of part of a society that's cooperating and collaborating together and trying to, you know, have a tide that lifts all boats. And that used to be how this country viewed itself. And even when you look at like children's shows or children's books from back in the mid part of the 20th century, it was all about empathy and, you know, humility and working together. And now, you know, even like when I look at little television shows designed for my 2-year-old son, it's increasingly about what you can do as an individual to achieve fame or fortune as an individual, rather than sort of all rising as a collective. And so I think if there's a silver lining from this pandemic crisis, I hope that people realize, I actually have the poster here. It says, solidarity, we are all we really have. And I hope that, you know, I hope that that is one sort of takeaway that we potentially have from this pandemic, is that we will only rise together as a society by, you know, lifting up everyone together. And by, you know, and I think that a lot of this hate in this country is folks that have basically been divorced from mainstream society. They're fundamentally lonely. Even if they're around individuals, they're lonely. And that's why we see the rise in opioid use. And that's why people are just alienated. And when you're alienated, you're especially immune to hate messages and to demagogues who are trying to sell you hate and bigotry and, you know, anti-immigrant sentiment or what have you, to sort of fill the void that they have, whether induced by a number of things. I mean, people like sort of like make fun of the whole economic anxiety thing. I certainly think that sort of material circumstances are part of it, but I think that people just are lonely, and an increasing number of people are lonely in this country. And I think if the Democratic Party, but really all of us, if we want to solve that problem, we have to think about how we can build community in sort of a restorative way with everybody, rather than just demonize a few people, lock them into a jail cell, and then go about our day.
Thank you for that. So the last question I have is I would be remiss to not talk about how the you know, what your impressions are of the assembly meeting during these, and here goes another thing we haven't said before, unprecedented times. So you know, I don't mean to presume, but I'm assuming with your health history, you're a little bit more self-aware of your surroundings during the pandemic than most. So, you know, fill us in on you know, how the assembly is accommodating for COVID, and how's that going so far?
Yeah, it's wild. Let me tell you, it is crazy. This session has been unlike no other before, and probably will never be repeated in terms of the weirdness. So certainly, yeah, on a personal level, I've been extremely diligent about distancing, and I've more or less been a shut-in, honestly, given my health history, and my son has respiratory issues too. So I've been extremely careful. And fortunately, you know, other than opening day of the General Assembly, where we had to go in to, you know, change the rules and whatnot, you know, constitutionally we had to go in on that first day, we have not had any floor sessions or otherwise any reason to be in Annapolis meeting together thus far. And so that has been really nice. And so this is, you know, my house, and I've been able to stay here and do purely virtual committee sessions this entire time. And I think the tentative plan is basically starting the week of February the 8th. So in about 10 days or so, we'll start to have those in-person floor sessions. So hopefully everyone sort of complies with the masking and the distancing requirements, but we're going to be spread out across the sort of legislative campus into 2 rooms. I know Delegate Atterbury explained this process a little bit to you all a few weeks ago as a way to sort of curb it, but we're having purely virtual committee sessions. And in terms of what the outcome has been, you know, I think it's really 2 main takeaways. Number one is that this first part of the session has been really condensed and packed in, and absolutely crazy for legislators, staff, advocates, everyone. So normally at this point in the session, late January, I would have had a total of 0 bill hearings. Usually my first bill hearings are the first week of February. I've had something like 8 already, which is more than half of my bills.
Wow.
So I'm more than half of the way done with my bill hearings, where normally I would not have even started. And so I've been having, one day this week, I had 3 bill hearings in one day in 2 different committees, while I was actually in Annapolis running around trying to get other bills introduced. So it's really because of COVID and wanting to pack as many committee sessions in as quickly as possible, so that we can then pivot to the in-person floor sessions, where constitutionally the leadership feels like we have to be on the floor. They've really condensed the schedule, and so it's been wild. And the other takeaway is, I think there are some cool silver linings to this, which is that it's really brought in more people to testify than ever before, because you no longer have to go to Annapolis to do it. And so because we're having all these Zoom committee hearings where people from across the state can testify from their comfort of their own home, I think that's been really awesome and democratizing. And I hope that certain parts of this new way we're doing things will live on, especially if they're sort of pro-democratic and pro more, voices being involved with the process. I'll give you one anecdote, which is there was recently a housing bill hearing that I was part of, and a mother testified about mold that was in her unit. And then actually, after her testimony had ended, said, oh, actually, could my 8-year-old son testify just briefly, just for a couple seconds? I know he didn't sign up. And she handed her iPhone to her 8-year-old son, and he tearfully explained about the respiratory difficulties that he was having from the room he was standing in, showing the mold. And so that was kind of a moment that only would be possible in this sort of pandemic, Zoom era we're living in. And for all the headaches we get, and for all the legislators who don't understand the technology and generate delays, and there's all sorts of confusion, I do think that the changes have created a few real kind of genuine moments for us to kind of break the fourth wall of our little, Annapolis virtual ivory tower, to experience more of what regular people are going through. And I think that the trope is sometimes like, well, lobbyists get you for 90 days when you're in Annapolis. You listen to lobbyists all the time. They're the ones who rule the roost. And then when you go home for the other 9 months of the year, that's when you talk to your regular constituents. That was often how Annapolis was portrayed as sort of existing, because it was so difficult for regular people to participate directly in the legislative process. And I think one really nice thing about the pandemic is way more voices with a couple clicks can have their voices heard.
Jason, I see you have one more question.
Just one, hopefully quick question. I know this is such a hot topic, a very contentious issue, both in Howard County as well as Montgomery County. What's the best way to reopen the schools?
This is a hot topic. So I'll just say a caveat that, it's a little bit above my pay grade. I think as Obama once said about some tricky topic, in the sense that I'm kind of glad that I'm not on a school board, or having to, or even on one of the education committees having to make these decisions, because it's extremely fraught. As a parent of a young child, I absolutely empathize with parents who want to get back to school as quickly as possible. But at the same time, I understand teachers who don't want to be villainized or demonized by the governor for simply not wanting to go back to school and die. So I think that, some of the rhetoric has gotten extremely heated. I think the science is somewhat murky. I do think that there's more and more studies suggesting that it's relatively safe to go back to school in person. If, and sometimes, mainstream news articles sort of miss the limitations of some of these studies, of several of which I've read, if you go through all the safety protocols, if your transmission in the community is relatively low, and you provide PPE, and you do all the distancing and the disinfectant, then it's safe. And so I think it's just a matter of, can we get all that done? Do we have enough funding to make sure that every local jurisdiction can pull that off in a safe way? Because I just don't think that it's worth sacrificing teachers' lives to reopen. I know that there's really there's a lot of good evidence that distance learning is tough on kids, especially vulnerable kids. And so I'm extremely sympathetic to that. It's obviously a very thorny issue. My hope, I think the best thing we can do right now here on January 29th is for the governor to start vaccinating people. Stop giving vaccines to CVS and Walmart and Giant, who have been by far the slowest parts of this process. West Virginia is kicking all of our asses with the vaccine rollout. We snicker at West Virginia the rest of the time and say they're a bunch of hillbillies, but with the vaccine, they're beating everyone. Well, what do? What was their genius move? They basically gave the middle finger to CVS and Walgreens, and they didn't give them any doses, instead relying on community pharmacies. And that's been the entire difference. Meanwhile, in Maryland, Governor Hogan is trying to go the exact opposite direction. He keeps announcing all these new public-private partnerships with all these different private entities. So long-winded way of saying that if we could get the vaccine situation under control and do about, we don't even have to be the best state in the country. We could just be like an average state in the country in terms of vaccine rollout. And I think that starts with getting the doses in the hands of county health departments so they can get the teachers vaccinated, because the teachers are already, in phase 1B to be vaccinated. They're all eligible to do so, but I've talked to a bunch of teachers in my district who aren't. If we can get the teachers vaccinated and we can do all this other stuff in terms of PPE, I think we can get the schools reopened in March. But we gotta get that done, because at the end of the day, I certainly don't want sort of the blood on my hands if there aren't safety protocols in place and a bunch of students and teachers get sick and community transmission, for example, in Montgomery County goes up.
Well, it is reassuring to hear an elected official that's putting science first. It does seem as though a lot that we're currently hearing from the governor's office these days seems to be more factored into political calculations for 2024 than actual science. So thank you for that answer.
Yeah, well, I think you're 100%. He's absolutely already running. He's already running. He knows what he's got to say to appeal to those, right-wing goons that vote in the 2024 Republican primary. And, after, it's disappointing because, he said all year on the pandemic, oh, we got to follow the science. We got to follow the science. And now I think he's really misstating the science. Absolutely some studies say it's safe, but if you read kind of the fine print, they say, yeah, it's safe, but you got to check all these boxes. Whereas Governor Hogan's position seems to be, it's safe, and anyone who disagrees with me in any aspect of what I'm saying is just a bum, who's lazy, and they're selling out our kids. And, he's previously called teachers union thugs. So this is kind of like right in line with that behavior. But that sort of rhetoric and that side of Larry Hogan is unfortunately, I think, only going to accelerate over these next 2 years as he appears on Morning Joe and Jake Tapper more and more, trying to, get votes in places like Iowa and New Hampshire.
Vaughn, before we let you go, is there anything else you want to say? Is there, of course, we know you have certain restrictions during the legislative session, but any events coming up for the District 19 team? Any, ways that people can get a hold of you? Anything of interest that might be to the average viewer or listener?
Yeah, so we can't fundraise. That's really the only restriction. But in terms of, I'm going to run for re-election in 2022. So people are interested in me personally and making sure that I keep my seat. That's great. I love that position. People can email me for whatever reason you want to, though, at Vaughn@vaughnformaryland.com. That's sort of like a campaign side email, but it goes directly to my cell phone. So if anyone wants to reach out to me to either get like a Zoom coffee, talk about legislation, or just has any other questions, maybe they want to run for office themselves, any and all inquiries, send there. It'll go to my cell phone immediately. I'm pretty good at getting back to people. But I think, I won't be self-promoting. I think the more important thing is this is the most important legislative session certainly of my political career and my career in public service, and probably the most important year of every single one of my colleagues' year in public service. When we're done, when we're retired and we look back, this is the year we'll be judged on because of all the suffering that's out there. When we have to deliver, we have to meet the moment. No more half measures. We have to be bold. And to make that happen, a lot of people in the General Assembly agree with me. Some don't agree with me. Some think that we can sort of half step our way to helping all the people that are struggling right now with job loss and income loss. And those people who agree with me, whether you want to call us progressives or whatever, we need help from regular people to make sure that we as the General Assembly do the right thing. We've still got, more than 2 months left of session. So don't think about me and my reelection right now. What I really need your help with is if any of the bills that I've talked about or interest you, or if you've heard of or read about any other bills that you think would be helpful for you or people you love, or just vulnerable people in your community generally, please reach out to the legislator, be it me or whoever who's sponsoring that, and ask how you can get involved. And how you can reach out to other legislators or, testify virtually or submit written testimony or whatever. That's the most important thing you can do right now, because this is an extremely crucial legislative session. There are thousands and thousands of Marylanders who can't even put food on the table. They're counting on us and people like me who want bold relief for Marylanders. I'm really counting on y'all to help us. And so that's my message. Obviously I want to be reelected, but we'll worry about that later.
Well, as Big Daddy Kane once said, there ain't no half stepping. And so this is definitely time for bold measures.
What he said. Delegate Stewart, thank you again. I hope you enjoyed your time, and we would love to have you on this podcast again.
And I'd love to be back, and I'm very, very happy that you all invited me. I enjoyed it, and I'm flattered.
And for those of you in viewer and listener land who, you know, as we were discussing at the outset of the podcast, you know, last year saw us more immediate to the Baltimore area with some forays in the far-flung places like St. Mary's County. But certainly as the 2022 cycle comes around, we are going to be truly more of a forward all of Maryland. So you know, we are going to step with caution and trepidation into Montgomery County and every corner of this great state. So, Jason, anything in closing?
Nah, I'm good.
Well, our soon-to-be travels take us to such exotic locales as Anne Arundel County, Talbot County, and Frederick. So where will we be next? You know, we'll just spin the wheel and we'll see you there. But for Jason Booms, my name is Bill Woodcock, and you've been watching or listening to Forward Maryland. Have a great weekend, everybody. Take care.